welcome to Off My Bridge! My name is Guy, and today we are looking at Starship Combat within the Star Trek Adventures 2 role-playing system from Modiphius. If you're not familiar with the basics of how the system works, I suggest you head on over to my other YouTube channel, How to Be a Great GM, and look for the videos on Star Trek Adventures 2. Link down below if you want to. Or if you want me to do a new video covering that on this channel, let me know in the comments and I will happily do it. And of course, always hit that like button. It's what the Federation would want. Before we even start combat, you have to realize a few things. One, the Starship always assists. The Starship always assists, and a lot of folks forget that. That extra 1d20 that the Starship rolls, always useful. It always has focus on its rolls. So that range of success just increases. Critical successes suddenly go from just a 1 to maybe a 1 through 3, through 4, 1 through 5 even. So that's really important. You can get 2 successes off of a Starship assist roll. That's major, especially considering that the bonus momentum that you generate in Starship Combat is vital for survival. Absolutely vital. You're going to see why in a little bit. Number 2, the Starship always begins with reserve power. Unless there's been some weird and wonderful thing that's carrying on and carrying over from one combat to another where you don't have reserve power, traditionally when you start a new scene, your ship always has reserve power. Reserve power is super important for a whole bunch of little maneuvers and things, but critically, it is required for the ship to go to warp. No reserve power, no warp. Number 3, ship's scale. Ships have different scales within Star Trek Adventures, ranging from scale 1 all the way up to scale 6, or theoretically even more than that. Definitely more than that in the case of Borg cubes and starbases and the like. The scale of your ship determines a whole lot of things. When we're looking at damage, the scale is super important. If your ship has a low scale of 3 or less, your ship is not taking a lot of damage before she gets destroyed. So you've got to focus on scale. The bigger the scale, the tougher the ship in general. Number 4, Star Trek Adventures 2 breaks up space combat into 4 zones. Contact, which is 0 zones, or you're in contact with, used for boarding, ramming, that kind of stuff. Close, which is still 0 zones away. You're in the same zone, but close is for really close kind of maneuvering, close attacks, things like that. Medium, which is 1 zone away. So you are adjacent to the zone in which your target is. Then you have long, which is 2 zones. And then you have extreme range, which is 3 zones. And anything beyond that, you might be in the same star system, but you're not within any kind of firing range. Zones are important to keep in mind, mainly for weapons ranges. Weapons have different ranges. Some can't fire at extreme range or at long range. Some can't fire at close range. And so it's really useful when you're doing space combat if you have a zone chart or zone tracker so that you can keep track of where your ship is relative to the enemies. The process of combat is not about this is exactly here, this is exactly there. There are no firing arcs, no forward, backwards, none of that kind of stuff. You don't have to worry about that. That is all just narratively added in. What is important is the combat and the decisions that the players make themselves. We now get to the very first step, which of course is determining turn order. And this is mechanics-based, but also law-based. The Federation very seldom will attack first. Unless it is a known enemy, it's a known hostile engagement, the Federation usually will attempt diplomatic channels first before launching any kind of attack whatsoever. With the turn order out of the way, we can then get into the actual combat, and for that, we're going to turn to the USS Kent. So we have the USS Kent, which is an Excelsior class ship, a scale 5 ship versus a Cardassian Gallo class ship. And the Gallo is only a size 4. 4, the space that they are in. There are no traits, there's no terrain modifiers. I'm keeping it simple for today's example. When you are running enemy vessels, or just vessels, I suppose, the ships have a crew quality rating, which is usually a value that reflects the ability of the crew, and there's a little table which shows you exactly what that crew quality should be based on the type of crew that are manning it, from poor crew to experienced crew and that sort of thing. So the Gallo has a crew quality of 9/2, so 9 base, 2 in departments, and has an 11 total. So we'll be trying to roll under 11s and get 1s and 2s for successes if we have focus on that. Compare that to the USS Kent, which is a PC-based ship. The average there is between 13 and 15. So the Kent would appear to have, on paper, an advantage in scale as well as an advantage in crew. But you're going to see how the Gallo, with some clever little maneuvers, can do some serious damage. The ships are at long range. There's one zone separating them. And the Cardassians fire first. This particular group of Cardassians, let's say they are part of the Obsidian Order, are attempting to utilize a new device. It is the Spinal Lance. And this is a long weapon. It runs the entire length of the Gallo, fires out of the deflected dish, and in order to fire it, we need to do a control and security, which we know from the Gallo crew quality is an 11. And the difficulty number to achieve a successful hit would be 2. Now the ship assists, and the ship has weapons plus security, 13, with a 4 focus in security. So that's really high. And then the DM is going to spend 3 threat to buy 2 more dice. So that's going to give us 5 dice in total. The Gallo rolls its attack and it gets an 8, a 9, a 9, and a 10. So all 4 of those are successes, coming in under that control plus security of 11. And then the ship assist, it rolls a 2, which is within its focus range for security, meaning it gets a double success. So that's 6 in total. However, the Spinal Lance is a cumbersome weapon, and this is something that you are going to have to learn or have handy as a cheat sheet whenever you are designing your starships and the weapons that they're using. All of the weapons have got different terms, different traits. Cumbersome, what that means is you increase the difficulty number to hit with a cumbersome weapon by 1. So instead of needing a 2, which is the standard for firing disruptors or phasers, it now needs a 3. So the 6 successes actually mitigate down to only 3 additional momentum. The damage of the Spinal Lance is 9. We can spend all 3 additional momentum to increase that damage to 12 because the weapon is also intense. And what intense does is it means that we can spend 1 momentum to increase the damage by 1 rather than 2 momentum to increase the damage by 1. So that's the attack. Straightforward, yes. Now, how do we resolve damage? Starships all have a resistance value, and that resistance is calculated using various methods which are described in the book, but are tied to the scale of the ship. The bigger the ship, the more the resistance. The USS Kent has a resistance of 5. So that means any damage incoming to the ship is already reduced by 5 just because of the Kent's resistance. So that's useful to know. The higher resistance, the less damage you're taking per attack. The damage goes from 12, reduced by 5, down to 7. That damage is now deducted from the ship's shields. The shields go down to 10, and now it would be the Kent's turn. Remember, initiative switches from one to the other. PCs, NPCs, PCs, NPCs, unless you are going to spend momentum to hold on to the initiative. So then the Kent would fire back. Now, if this was just how combat worked, it would be fun, but there's so much more to it. And we know that is in the form of ship's orders. Each department has a series of orders that they can issue, and there are quite a lot of orders that can be issued. There's some generic ones which anybody can order or use, and then they're department-specific ones. So I've broken them down into command, sciences, and operations. I've also turned them into actual cards. Each order I've turned into a card. Why have I done this? There are a lot of orders, and players who are not completely familiar with the rule systems often will become overwhelmed. There's so many orders I can give, and we're in the middle of battle. I don't know what one to do. It allows me as the GM also to just quickly build a deck going, okay, this is the order, this is the order, this is the order, that's the order, and I'm done. Every PC gets to issue an order, and they get to follow through in that order. Orders are broken into two different types of mechanic. You get a major action and you get a minor action. Each PC can take one major and one minor unless they spend momentum to do more. From an NPC perspective, the NPC ships can only issue as many orders as the scale of the ship. So the Gallo, in this example, the Gallo can only issue 4 orders per turn, whereas the Excelsior could have done 5 because of the scale. The person who is playing captain should be saying, okay, we need to engage with these people, or we need to try and negotiate with them, or target weapons, don't target this, or target that, don't target this, or target that, and don't target this. There has to be a focus, and the captain has to be the one who brings that focus to the table. But at the same time, the players should be free to go, well, I'm going to scan that ship and give you a bonus to your attack, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do, etc., etc., etc. So if we take our scenario all the way back, the very first order that the Gallo now does, because the Gallo is firing first, the Obsidian Order Gull decides to issue the order Direct. It's a major action, and what this does is it causes the tactical officer to make their attack, and so the captain then gets to make a single die roll of control and command. If they get successes, that gets added to the character who they have directed to take an action of. And in this case, the Gull has said, tactical, destroy that ship. I want nothing left. Fire everything. So the tactical officer does exactly what we did before. 2 for their normal roll, 1 for ship assist, 2 for spending the 3 threat to gain 2 additional die. Then the captain rolls as well. So we are now rolling 6 dice to determine this weapon's attack. Same values as before, an 8, a 9, a 9, a 10, a double success from the ship assist, plus the captain rolls a 1. And that gives them 2 more successes. So now instead of 6 successes, they have 8 successes for the spend of 4 threat. 8 successes, the difficulty number is still 3. Remember, it's 2 plus the 1 for the cumbersome weapon. That's 5 additional momentum. They can pour all 5 momentum into that damage of that spinal lance, and that increases the damage to 14. 14 points of damage. The Kent's resistance is 5, so 14 minus 5 leaves us on 9. 9 damage to the Kent's shields. Shields of 17, they now drop to 8. That is less than 50%. And as a result, the moment your shields are dropped below 50%, your ship suffers the shaken condition. Shields at 48%, Captain! Shaken has a little reference table, which you can roll on to see what the effect of the shaken is. In the case of the Kent, a roll. Unfortunately, the Kent loses reserve power. So the ship has lost reserve power. What does that mean? The ship cannot go to warp, and shields cannot be restored. So the Kent is now in a very difficult situation, and to bring back reserve power, because there are orders that will allow an engineer or an operations officer to restore reserved power, the difficulty is now increased by 1. The Kent is now in a bad place. Now it's the Kent's turn. But previously Cole had just fired, as that made the most sense. This time, however, Captain Hanot decides to talk first. And what he does is he orders Tanam, he orders her to take evasive action. Don't let them hit us, Tanam. Cole is like, but you know, the best defense is offense. Just shoot them and destroy them, and then they won't be able to attack us. We shouldn't be hiding or running. We should be fighting. Noted, says Hanut. The ship is now under evasive maneuvers. The Cardassians, it is now their turn, and now the tactical officer, no longer under orders from the Gull, but now operating as his own, can now fire the Cardassian phaser banks, which are on either side of those blades of the Gallo. The Cardassians are only to spend 1 threat, And so that means they have 2 normal dice, 1 additional dice from threat, and the ship assist. This time they roll a 9, a 14, and a 13, which translates to 2 successes. Normally, the 2 successes would be sufficient. 2 successes is all you need to hit with a phaser or disruptor attack. 3 successes with torpedoes of any kind. However, evasive maneuvers is now in play. And evasive maneuvers, Tanam now gets to roll a daring and control, which is 14, plus the ship assist of structure and con, which is 13. The roll is 5, 5, and 7 for 3 successes. This means that the Cardassians have missed their shot because it is now an opposed roll. So the Cardassians got 2 successes, Tanam got 3. The phaser banks miss their target. The USS Kent avoids taking damage. Now, if the Kent had been hit, those phaser banks are doing 7 damage, plus perhaps an additional damage from the overspend. From being versatile, it could have increased even more. The potential loss to the USS Kent, their shields would have sunk even lower, possibly by 3 or even 4 points, bringing them all that much closer to 0. So the captain's evasive maneuvers have completely changed the narrative. The ship is now still in combat. A ship is still able to return fire, which Cole can now do. Unfortunately, evasive maneuvers also applies an additional 1 difficulty to Cole's attack. So with phasers, it now becomes 3, and with torpedoes, it would become a whopping 4. Now, when the shields go down, that is when things get very dark. Every subsequent hit that your ship takes, you roll on a location chart, unless the security officer is using an order to target a specific area of the ship, and that is the area that suffers a breach. Each section of the starship can suffer up to half the number of the ship's structure in breaches. So if the ship's structure is 4, it can suffer 2 breaches. The second breach takes the system offline. It is unusable. It cannot be used. Engineers are going to have to run around and try and do something. They certainly can. The engineering officer can issue an order to go and try and do some repairs quickly to get that system back online. But the system automatically fails any tasks it attempts to do. So if your weapons are taken offline, you just cannot fire back. And that's all weapons, by the way. When your ship suffers a number of breaches equal to your structure plus 1, so a Gallo can actually only sustain 4 breaches in total. When the ship's breaches equals the ship's structure, the ship is useless and can do nothing else. 1 more breach and that's it. The Gallo is toast. Now, if the engines are hit, the engines, when they go offline, and remember, bear in mind, they often will only take 2 or 3 hits to go offline. When they go offline, there's a risk of a warp core breach, and that will require the chief engineer or the engineer or whomever to run around and try and prevent that breach, sucking up those valuable orders. That is how space combat works. Bear in mind the weapon and the descriptors of that weapon. Those are things that are tricky and change significantly. Issuing of orders and the order in which those orders are issued will make the difference between life and death. Now, can you imagine if you add on top of that conditions and traits within the spatial space that the combat is happening in? Having a battle inside the Badlands or inside the Mutara Nebula, for example, completely changes all of the orders and things that you might want to issue. And if I've made any mistakes, let me know in the comments down below so we can all learn from them. I absolutely love it. And to be honest with you, I think the Kent could take this Gallo, but I feel like it might be close. That spinal weapon of the Gallo is super powerful. Until next time, thanks for watching. Hit that like button. We'll see you next week when we're building an adventure together. And until then, live long and happy gaming.